Hi, and welcome to The Fault Line, a CMG consulting podcast exploring the pivotal moments where business strategy meets real-world pressure. I'm excited for our conversation today. As usual, Kim Scribner, my partner in crime, is with me, and we've got a terrific guest, Danielle Law, who I'll dish it to in a moment. And we're going to talk about essentially before the what. We want to talk about the why and the who and the when and how we create focus on the right elements, the proper elements at the right time for the right people to make sure that the strategies we create actually turn into action and not just a frenzy of activity, but the right actions in the right order and the right priorities. So with that, Danielle, why don't you give a little brief primer on yourself and then we'll get right into the conversation.
Sure. I'm Danielle Law. I am the Director of Integrated Brand Strategy and Marketing, which is a mouthful, at an academic medical center health system. So I manage our brand strategy and marketing teams and our social media teams, and they work really cross-functionally, thanks in huge part to our partnership with CMG.
That's lovely to hear. Kim's already smirking. I know you two go way back. Do you want to say some things, Kim?
Yeah, I'm very, very excited to be spending time with Danielle today. So we've spent about 3 years working together, and I had the opportunity to watch her in action. And I'm very happy that she's here having this conversation with us today because she is one of the leaders that I have come across in my time working with organizations that really gets the understanding, why something is important and making sure that others understand why things are important to do them instead of just focusing on outputs. And so a lot of our time spent together was on outcomes over outputs, and repeating that over and over again to folks on her teams. And I'm excited to jump into the conversation today.
That's great. That's great. And for me, I'm excited about this because, from observation and probably a few hard knocks of experience, it's easy as a leader to step up to the lectern or sit at the end of a big conference table and say, so this is what we're going to do, and think that the reasons behind it are self-evident. And I'm curious, Danielle, from your experience and Kim's great characterization of the work that you've done, how you might start in on this and just kind of lead us through the first part of the conversation. Believe me, I'll ask questions as we go, but I'm really curious about, why you're so passionate about these aspects of getting strategy into action.
Yes, I am kind of rigid in the way I think we start work. And so one of my pet peeves may be too strong of a word, but in workplaces, you often hear the phrase ladder up. How is what we're doing going to ladder up to priorities? And this makes me crazy because that's not the way we start, right? So it's working in reverse of the way that this should happen. So rather than taking what we've always done or what matches our skill sets and figuring out how to walk it back to priorities, we have to start with what are the most important priorities? And then how do our skill sets add value to these? And so the complexity here in an organization as multifaceted and bureaucratic as mine sometimes is that everything is important. Things can literally be life or death in terms of their prioritization. But the value that we add as a brand strategy and social media and marketing team may not align with that. The way that we can contribute to those goals isn't as clear as we want it to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we often get really big priorities that come to us, and then the work, the what is assigned to that ask. I have this big cancer project. I need a brochure. And so I'm always trying to walk this line of, I hear you. What you're doing is so important. And let's talk about how my team, right? How we can maybe help you get to those business goals. because
Hmm.
maybe a brochure is not the answer. And I would argue that almost always a brochure is not the answer. Um, and also, maybe this isn't a place where brand strategy or marketing have a role to play, even if it is a top priority in the way that we've ranked those.
I think it's always interesting working with health systems specifically in marketing, right? Because marketing almost has a bad name in health systems, and you all are a tripart mission, right? So you're trying to serve multiple missions. And in healthcare, in other healthcare organizations that I've worked with as well, it's like, are we marketing get sick? No, we're not marketing get sick. We're marketing, if you are sick, we are the best place that can help you. And here's the results that we get for our patients, right? And so what I hear you saying is like starting from that point of like, what's the problem we're trying to solve for that audience rather than what's the upward kind of goal we're trying to achieve as an organization. Hopefully they're closely aligned, but if you don't start with the person that you're impacting, you could be doing the wrong thing.
Yes. And things may be a huge priority for the organization, but we have to ask the tough questions. Is there capacity for this life changing service? Because if not, we are marketing disappointment. We are leading people to an expectation that we can't fulfill. And so when we center that end user, it helps us think about, is the experience good, right? Are people going to be miserable when they get there? Are they going to wait on the phone and have no appointments for 9 months? That's not where we use our resources, even if I have a team of people who could put together a really beautiful omni-channel campaign to drive people to that service. We have to think about it holistically. If they can't get in, we're doing more harm to the brand than good.
I absolutely love that. My soundbite on that is usually, and I loved hearing you say marketing disappointment, because I will often say, if we're not prepared to finish off the experience, we're introducing a fly at high velocity to its windshield nemesis, right? It's just a splat experience. And, there's the old axiom among us marketing wonks of, trial is easy, repeat is hard, right? If you deliver a disappointment excellently, it has a knock-on effect that is very, very hard to overcome. And so those precursors of, are we ready for it? In packaged goods, do we have distribution before we turn on the advertising? Because otherwise we send people to the store to not find it. Do we have capacity to deliver on whatever demand there may be? Is the experience commensurate with the commitment we're making, or are we getting out ahead of ourselves? All of those are some of those fundamental factors that are thematic for us today.
So I think when I was working with Danielle and her organization, the teams spent a lot of time thinking about first understanding the problem statement and then working that through to who it was for and understanding the personas that were being impacted. And I think, that's part of what we're here to talk about today is making sure that we're not just doing things, because we can do a whole lot of things to the points that you're both making. If they're the wrong things, then we're just wasting resources, human time and actual money if we've got paid media behind the wrong things potentially as well. And so spending time really diving in on what is the problem so that we can build the appropriate solutions at the appropriate time and at the appropriate level. So something that Danielle, you were always really good about was saying, what's the level of effort we should be spending on this particular problem? Because we could overinvest potentially as an organization as well.
Yes, I've been trying to have more visual language when I ask this question. And so we've started asking the team, where are you polishing the silver, right? Where have you put too much investment in for the outcome that you expect here? And part of that requires us to understand that hypothesis of impact. We have to understand beforehand, how do we think this is going to matter? And then how do we right size the efforts? Because when we think about investing in work, we're thinking about time. We're often thinking about money. And I think we sometimes fail to think about the investment of that task switching. if we're doing too many things, and Kim's helped me see this over and over again, we are taking ourselves away from that deep work and we are losing out on the impact by by investing too much of ourselves, I think, and not giving ourselves the space to do that highest value work.
Yeah.
Um,
So for those of you who are only listening to us, I am like joyfully smiling because to hear Danielle talk about these things, about not over investing, about making sure that time is spent appropriately, about saying no to the things that we shouldn't be doing, like it just makes my heart so happy.
And we've talked in the past about the crucial currencies, right? Time, energy, and money, obviously. And there are trade-offs between those. And what I think I heard from you, Danielle, just now is if we take on too many calls on our attention, right, we can't actually invest the time and energy where it's going to have the greatest impact, right? And for people who are living in tight budgets, it's sometimes incredibly helpful to think in those terms as well, because the time and energy of the team become almost more precious resources than dollars, because you don't have a lot of dollars as a percentage of revenue or in an absolute sense. So, I'm curious as you think through this, and you clearly have sort of a disciplined approach to how you initiate these things. How do you think through the human aspects in terms of who's being served and who's providing the service as you contemplate shaping strategy and providing the direction that you need?
Kim mentioned we try to start with the problem statement. And this is a constant work for all of us, right? I catch myself putting the what into the problem statement. And so sometimes we end up writing a problem statement that we've already planted a solution or a tactic into. And so it is a kind of group accountability, and something that we say in our multifunctional pods, it's pod accountability to pull us back to understanding the real problem. And part of that is, who is it a problem for, right? Who may be left out of this when we're thinking about equity and other issues. And then why is it a problem? Where has it been solved elsewhere? How do we truly understand it? And how do we get to the most open-ended problem statement that we can get to, rather than saying, how do we put together a marketing strategy that helps here? Because then we've already put marketing strategy in there, and we're probably missing the real solution just because we found an opportunity.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's almost it's like brainstorming with the solution already in your mind, right? So you've got to keep blinders off, so to speak, when you're creating those problem statements.
And my good friend Chris Paccioni, who helped found the Luma Institute years ago, used to always use the term be framative. Think specifically about how your language frames the next step, and be very mindful of just what you talked about, Danielle, being too prescriptive in what you're naming as a problem statement, but actually what you're saying is, I want you all to do this thing. And, that's the danger I think I heard from you, is like, hey, step back from that and let's have more of a how might we approach to it, rather than, embedding the solutions into this thing that we're characterizing as a problem statement. Love that. Love that. Um, Kim, you look like you might have a question fomenting behind your
Yeah, I'm
eyes
thinking
there.
about how the how might we also goes along, or is in opposition of what we hear people say sometimes, which is, well, we've always done this. And
Mhm.
so the response to the we've always done this could be, how might we do it differently? Or why have we always done it? And so even just having open conversations like that helps us get to the root of why we're doing something, because we're at least opening up the conversation to the whys, right? So as a former and reformed business analyst, I ask why a lot. And that helps us get down to the root of the reason the work is important or isn't important. And we have to be open to also saying, just because we had this idea and thought it was important to begin with doesn't mean we should follow through with it all the way.
I think Kim's point is really important. When we frame it in a how might we with curiosity, we take some of that fear-based reaction away from, but I've always done it this way. Because it's
Uh-huh.
scary to approach something with all the possibilities, to say we need to be able to understand impact, to hypothesize why it matters, to give the rationale, and we're going to close the loop at the end, right? And iterate, scale, shut it down, whatever it is. Those things are really scary if you have a way that you've done it. And so when we approach it with a how might we, with the centering the people that we serve, right? We go through and look at data, personas, journeys, then it helps us kind of wrap our arms around the part that we've always connected to and away from the methods that feel really comfortable, but that we sometimes don't know that they work anymore. And so the curiosity and the how might we approach to the problem, I think it doesn't ameliorate all the fear, but it gets us closer to feeling like it's approachable for people.
Well,
I think it also like it helps you frame conversations with your internal customers well also, right? Because what I have seen you do well in your organization is create business partnerships with people who are looking for actual outcome based results, whether that's related to patient care or related to the university system. And that is very difficult to do in any organization, even if it's commercially based, right? To have the marketing organization seen as people who drive results is difficult. But if you can frame the conversations as what are we trying to accomplish together and really get down to the root of what the outcome is that they're seeking, you can be seen as a valued asset and partner inside the organization instead of just this team that produces pretty looking things for us.
Yes. And that is my ultimate goal in leading these teams, as that we are not seen as a cost center, right? We are a business asset. My team can be strategic partners. We're not vendors who make things beautiful. We can make things beautiful, but there is a reason, right? That we want continuity of brand, that we want white space, that things need to be easy for people to read and understand. And it's not just because they look pretty to our creative team who are brilliant, but there's a reason behind it. And so the more that we can come in and show our value, and often that does need to be in administrative hours saved, in new patients, right? In revenue, then we start to bridge that gap and we can be strategic partners, be brought into those conversations earlier, and we're not like an agency that operates within a large organization.
and you touched on an element there that I don't want to let sort of slide, which is marketing, and good marketing is in many ways one of the linchpin emotional bridges to the people being served. And the consistency across different facets of the value proposition, different moments in a user, in this case, a patient's journey, how marketing can help be the representative of each of those moments of truth. Hey, if we do this the right way, we actually build commitment into our relationship. If we do it the wrong way, we've betrayed that commitment, and we're going to have to earn it back. That representative function is also, for me, fundamental as organizations try to manifest the potential of being empathetic, right? And being empathetic is not just, oh, I feel what you feel, but it's also then responding appropriately and providing the right kind of inputs and responses and support and service and care and everything else. And in so many cases, our functional partners are inherently required to look at how widget A moves to, this new position in a scheme. And we as the sort of marketing folks get to say, well, how does somebody feel about that movement? Right. And that's a massive value contributor when it's done right. Um, so I'm curious how, as you were going through the journey, and we think about the why and the people and putting things in place, how have your cross-functional partners responded and maybe evolved through the course of your journey in your current circumstance in your organization? Because I'm guessing there was some change there over time.
Yes. We used to be service line oriented. So we had people dedicated to cancer, right? We had marketing teams dedicated to cardio. And that really didn't allow us to swarm around the most important problems and to align our resources where they made the most sense for the institution. And so a lot of it was really us rethinking how we represent ourselves because marketing is kind of a dirty word, right? In a healthcare institution,
Especially.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it's a
it's met with
provocative word.
yeah, and sometimes we're met with a little disdain. But when we really started to reframe it as something more along the lines of consumer insights, we understand your patients. We have personas, we've done surveys, we've done focus groups. We own this knowledge. You own it in this N is one. You know the patients individually. We can help you bridge that gap between some sort of mass marketing campaign or email or my chart message and really kind of home in on how we meet them where they are. Just a super cliche phrase, but we really need to think about segmentation and personalization. And so we had to help our internal partners kind of re-understand our skill sets and how we could help them. And so rather than everything gets a web page or everything gets a flyer, how do we understand for this subset of patients or when we're recruiting, right? Anesthesiologists, when we're thinking about students, when we're talking about researchers, how do we understand their main pain points and gains and then address what we're doing to kind of help them understand what we can offer them and balance that with how we can be really honest about where we are. And so it doesn't feel like it's just marketing. We're not putting a polish on things. How can we find authenticity in who we are and help that reflect what the experience would be when they're here?
And I can't underscore enough the power of the better I understand the people I'm serving, the better we collectively can serve them. And bringing that to life is for me, it's something that, in the consulting work that we do, it's a recurring theme because oftentimes, again, people will just get hunkered down and it's sort of a natural thing to get into a groove, to be focused where you're focused. I'll go back to the example you gave when we started our conversation of somebody showing up saying, I need a brochure. And the fear factor potentially is if you say, do you? Do you really need a brochure? Is that forces them, one, to challenge their sense of urgency. I just got to get this done. And two, to reflect on, but I've always gotten a brochure for this. Why would I consider something else? And the catalyst for that sort of shift is often, well, let's talk about what we understand about the people we're serving and how a brochure may or may not address a need that they have versus some other options. So I very much appreciate how you kind of brought those together. And once
I
again,
think
Kim is smirking.
because the secret of that is in the data, right? It will speak for itself. And I think when we're too squishy about outcomes, we can lose that argument that we're just talking about, Gary. And so something that Danielle and her teams have done really well in my exposure to them is share data, outcome related data that your internal partners really care about. And that helps build trust. And so the more you build trust, the more likely they are to bring the problem instead of the solution to you the next time they come and ask for something because they know that they can count on you to deliver. So I think, data is a huge part of this. It helps us understand the right amount of effort and who the people are that we're trying to impact. And it's often one of the most black and white things that we can present to folks. And so it leaves less space for debate about what we're doing because it is clear.
And it gives confidence to the people who are newer at having those conversations that feel like pushback, but are a normal part of healthy discourse to say, I have the data. And here's where we can go with it. And it's not a your expertise versus my expertise, right? We meet on the data, on what we know, and then we can figure out how to have those conversations because it's intimidating if you are in marketing and you meet with a world-renowned surgeon, right? Cancer researcher, whatever this is, to think that your expertise has a place in the conversation. Their expertise is amazing, right? World-renowned for a reason. But we have to own our expertise in the fields that we have and find a really graceful way to bring that to the conversation. And I think data is really the foundation of doing that.
And in many ways, that takes what is a I'm right, you're wrong dynamic and turns it into what is the truth, right? Which is actually safer for everybody involved because we're just in a process of discovery together then. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit. This conversation has been fantastic, Danielle. We talked a little bit at the beginning about prioritizing and understanding as you deploy your resources where the greatest impact can be had. Could you share a few reflections on how you go about that prioritization and socializing it with your cross-functional partners so that they understand? Because sometimes they're going to go to the front of the line, sometimes they're going to wait in line. And I'm kind of curious how you manage that dynamic given everything else we've been talking about.
Sure. It's never comfortable, but I think repetition helps us have more confidence in those conversations and
Okay.
clarity at an institutional level. These are the most important things we're doing. That's kind of the scaffolding. And so if we know these are the top 5 priorities, then I can reflect and say, here's where I think brand strategy can be an asset to this. We cannot solve purely operational issues, but maybe there's messaging that makes those operational issues feel like they have less friction for patients. And there are places where we can add revenue, where we are a business driver. And so finding within that scaffolding our opportunities to really add value is important. And then it's always critical for me to try to visualize it for my team. So sometimes that's as silly as a Miro board where I say, okay, here are the 5 priorities. Here are where our skill sets can really make a difference. And then making sure that my direct reports can go back to their cross-functional teams and really kind of own that context and say, here's the part of the priorities that we own. What do we think has the most value here? And so I can kind of give them that context and where I see opportunities. And then it is up to them to really understand the best way to do it. They determine the what, but they have to really be fluent in those priorities. And it's a burden on all of us. I take a lot of it on myself because Kim knows I love to be miserable, I guess. But it, it is.
I would say you want it to be done well.
Yes, yes.
Misery done well, the next podcast episode.
I love it. It is ruthless to a point because everything is important. Every condition, every patient, every research project, every clinical trial, it's all important. And so there is a ruthlessness to it where we have to say, yes, this new clinic is going to be amazing for that community. But we think the value we can add 10 patients a month and it would cost us this much in ad campaigns, right? And we don't have the people to answer the phones. So people are waiting. It's not a great experience. Whereas this new clinical trial, this is an arbitrary example, we might be able to put together a social media campaign, right, with a story to our internal members that helps drive a ton of awareness here. The lift is lower, the impact is higher. And so even though it may be priority 4 and the clinic is priority 2, when we factor in our investment and the expected outcome, then we kind of get more ruthless in that prioritization because our value add doesn't always perfectly align with what the institution says the priorities are. And so that's where we kind of find our way.
Yeah, and I love that intersection of importance and difficulty. It's another one of my favorite design thinking methodologies to sort of say, okay, we have finite resources. So based on all of this, where do we get the greatest traction? And it might be that priorities number 1 and 2 can carry themselves for whatever reason, and we can add value or momentum in these other areas. And I'll I'll say it ahead of time. I know this is going to come off as a little bit corny, but there is an element of almost triage in that space, right? Where is the cause not going to get any benefit at all from us? And we got to walk away from it, right? Where are we essentially potentially putting a lot of effort into something that's not actually going to get much better, even, with all this effort? And then where's the sweet spot in between, right? And that's where we want to actually get the maximum leverage off those 3 currencies: time, energy, and the money that we have to spend. I
And,
feel
like,
validated that you're nodding. Thank you.
we we can't backfill time, right? Like, time is a finite resource, and something that I think is also valuable that I've seen done with Danielle and her teams is there are some templates and things like that are made available to teams that if they do want to create a flyer, they can use the template, they can use the branding so that that doesn't necessarily have to come to the marketing team, but it can still serve the purpose that's needed, right? So it's making assets available to your organization so that those important to somebody but less impactful things can be done by somebody that doesn't have the high marketing skill.
Yeah, syndicating the materials and a certain level of capability out across the organization. Yeah, I love that. That's good. All right. So Danielle, a standard question about this far into the conversation is, what have we not talked about that as you came into this podcast, you were like, oh, I sure hope I get to tell this story? Is there anything where you're like, oh, this is just, God, I got to get this across, otherwise I'll have missed an opportunity?
I had not thought of this beforehand, but one aspect of this that trips me up sometimes is that we don't operate in a vacuum where there are no political considerations. There are stakeholders who are more important. And so the matrices of how we make our decisions get more complicated depending on who is asking. And so I'm always pushing, annoying the team to think about, is this a stakeholder happiness project? Are we doing this because of the internal partner relationship? Are we doing it because we very sincerely can't say no? And I think you can say no to almost anything. I will put together a paper to send to the president to say this is why we should not purchase this badge. We should not do this. And it's his decision. But there are times where, depending on the circumstances, that's the additional facet that you have to think through is, okay, we do have to keep the relationship. And I often err on the, just don't do it because it's not a high value thing. And then luckily I'm surrounded by people who kind of say, hey, for the future or our, longitudinal thinking here, we do need to find some sort of happy medium. We do need to take more time to explain why. We do need a deeper discovery here, or we need to have the conversation one-on-one if we don't, in fact, need to complete the work.
Humans are so complex with their emotions and vanities.
But what's important there is, because I've had this happen since I was a young fledgling, way before my coaching and agile
5-6
days.
years ago, right?
Yes, Gary, thank you for calling me young. Is understanding why somebody is asking for something can actually help us make those decisions also, right? So I've worked in organizations where people have said, the president said we need to do this. And usually my first question there is, but did you ask the president why they needed to do this? Because sometimes there is something we're missing. So definitely there is the weight of somebody's position in an organization or a level of authority or impact, but understanding why they're asking for it can provide us with some information that we can still deliver something better than even they expected, or might actually solve a problem they didn't think about.
And if nothing else, it is an opportunity to assert ourselves as experts and people who operate in data and truth. So even if you lose the battle, there can be a long-term benefit in having that really thoughtful conversation.
Is such great perspective as well, because in some cases, and I had a boss many years ago who said, listen, you're ascending to a new level of responsibility. Understand, if you sneeze in the wrong context, people are going to spend $100,000, right? If you say, oh, I wonder what this would be like, there are people in the organization who are going to take that as direction. And so be mindful of that. And so for me, Danielle, the flip side of that sentiment is, as people with expertise, as people with capability and a level of agency, sometimes the pushback actually refines the thinking of even the most vain of leaders to say, well, I hadn't looked at it through those lenses, or wait, we were doing that? I didn't intend for us to do that. That was just like spitballing with some folks. So, that those little moments, although they're courage moments frequently because of positional authority and how deferential a lot of humans are, can actually be helpful in not distracting the organization from the underlying priorities, or at least sequencing some of those. And yes, I forget what you called the vanity projects, but putting those in the appropriate level of urgency and priority. Yeah, we will do this once these three other things are complete. Let's get to the other side of this big event. And that also is sometimes very, very helpful and provides just a little breathing room for everybody to go, oh, okay, I don't have to
And it's
reset
especially
my whole
helpful
agenda.
how often have we all started or postponed something that somebody asked for that we thought was less impactful, and then by the time we circle back to them and say,
They
okay,
forget
we're
about
ready
it.
to work on this thing now, and they're like, oh, I totally forgot about that, right? So postponing is a tactic to make sure we're working on the most important things also.
And this is where that ruthless prioritization helps us have a more fruitful conversation in terms of trade-offs. If we take on this work, we will be delaying or ending these projects. And if your leader says, as the owner of this institutional prioritization and strategy, yes, this is more important, then at least we've had the maximum amount of clarity and understanding what that is. We're not killing ourselves to do twice the work. We're trying to establish those boundaries and being really clear about the trade-offs.
Yeah, I think
Awesome.
what has been kind of a through line here is it's being purposeful in your approach to deciding what you're doing. And that's in every context, whether it's understanding the audience, it is understanding the timing of something, it's bringing data to a conversation, so that all of those happen with purpose and intention aligned to your strategic priorities.
First of all, thank you. I think finishing on that note of being purposeful and very intentional in how we think about problem statements, how we think about who's being served, how we think about the prioritization and the implementation of it. There's a ton of nuggets in the conversation we just had, and I want to thank you, Danielle, for being with us. I hope we can do this again at some point in the future. And for everybody else out there, on behalf of Kim Scribner, my co-host, and myself, thanks for listening to The Fault Line, CMG's podcast. Find us wherever you get your podcasts, or just check us out on LinkedIn. And I want to encourage everybody, come to our new website as well. And if you got feedback on that, we love feedback. So thanks, and we'll be talking to you again soon. Take care.